So I was faced with the sort of hypocrisy of a music industry that will applaud loudly if you're walking around with cocaine falling out your nose and go, hey, or if you're drinking a lot and go, hey. If you're a heroin, there's no one doing that. Particularly if you're not making anyone any money. If you're making someone money, then it's kind of slightly different, right?
I dreamt that you were twisting through 7 suns of gold, and the gypsy was insisting.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Soberful podcast. I'm delighted that today I am joined by Simon Mason from the UK. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Veronica.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Simon. Simon wrote a fantastic memoir that was out actually about 10 years ago now, and it was called Too High, Too Far, Too Soon. And it was about his experiences as a drug dealer and as Oasis's drug dealer. I'm going to tell you, I get sent a lot of memoirs and I don't read them. I'm sure they're great. You know, I just don't want to keep reading drug memoirs. But I read this one and it was excellent. It got lots of acclaim. It did really well. And it became a stage show in London's West End. Is that right?
It did. And by the way, Irvine Welsh, he of Trainspotting, Notoriety, books, films, and also said, I generally tend to not read drug memoirs, but I really enjoyed this one. So you're in good company. You're in Irvine Welsh. And yes, it did become a stage show. And currently it is actually out of print whilst I put the finishing touches to the follow-up, which we will talk about, I'm sure.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, it was really it was really good. So I want to talk a little bit about those experiences. Simon has been clean and sober. Did you say coming up for 17 years?
I reckon I'm going to make it till next June, in which case that'll be 17 years, yeah.
I think so too. But his main love is his band, the Hightown Pirates. Available on Spotify, or where can people
find out? There are 2 Hightown Pirates albums on Spotify and YouTube and all those other things that I don't make any money at all out of. Because I'm of a certain age, I've pressed albums onto vinyl because it does sound better on vinyl. So yeah, the Hightown Pirates stuff is I suppose with streaming, you have to sort of think, well, people can listen to it, and if they like it, maybe they'll buy it one day. So, yeah.
Yeah, my best friend is a musician, and it's, you know, she said, you know, her gigs years ago, she'd make really great money from CD sales, but nobody buys CDs anymore. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. This
is pretty hardcore, your story. If you've read the book, and guys, read the book, it's really good.
If you can't find a copy of it, you can get it. It's on. You can Kindle it. Yes.
Yeah, I think you actually sent me a signed copy. I'm pretty sure I've got a signed copy somewhere. I've still got it somewhere.
I did.
It was
send
yeah. Okay, let's go back. Tell us what it was like before you started using drugs, and let's get into that.
I'll probably use the word normal a few times over the next few minutes or whatever, and of course it's just one of those words that I use when I can't think of a better one. But I suppose, to all intents and purposes, as a very young child, there was a normal family unit in a normal town in a normal part of England, and we did normal things, you know. So if you were talking to me and it was Christmas 1970, kitchen probably topping the ends of sprouts, my dad would probably be over the pub with my granddad having a couple of pints. My sister and I would be running around excited, waiting for Father Christmas. We had that in fairly quick succession. That started to unravel really quickly. So we had an aunt who was like a maiden aunt who was, you know, we were really close to. She committed suicide with alcohol and tablets after a doomed romance. She killed herself. Then my father died in November of 1979. I was 11. Something which I don't think you ever really fully recover from those kind of traumas when you're really little. I mean, it gets different over time, obviously, and but it was such a huge blow. I idolised my father. If he was alive today, he'd be 100. He was a pilot in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. We're a Jewish family, not practicing, and so, you know, he was kind of sticking it to the Nazis when he was 20 years old, which I defy anyone to not turn those kind of guys, and quite rightly, into heroes, because they were.
Yeah.
And then my grandfather, who had sort of nominally stepped in once my dad died, he died just over a year later. So there was a lot of death. There was a lot of people leaving. There was a lot of space to fill. There was a void. And then, unfortunately for me, I'd been placed into a boarding school, not a public school, just a school where you slept. And then I was sexually abused for years by the priests that ran the school. So I by the time I was a teenager, so by the end of the 70s, early 80s, I was really angry. And I choose my words carefully there because that's what I was. I didn't know that I was traumatized. I didn't know that I had suffered, and there were things that perhaps other people could have done to help me through that trauma. I didn't know that. I just knew that the authority that I was placed in had let me down, and not only let me down, but had then taken advantage of me, and the whole kind of idea of religion and God in a Catholic boarding school, the whole thou shalt not, just really upset me. I couldn't do the math and go, well, hang on, on the one hand, you're telling me there's this all-caring, all-loving God, but where is he every night when this guy's coming to, he's not here? And then around about the time, so I'm 11, 12, cigarettes and then music at the same time. I discovered those two things, and music was the one thing, and I say this with absolute certainty, music saved my life. It gave me something, it spoke to me, it spoke for me. I was into quite angry, loud English rock and roll bands, so the Who and the Sex Pistols and all this. I had no idea what they were saying, but it said something. It said a lot, and I got completely consumed by that. And bizarrely, and here's a nice part of an otherwise so far quite dark story. Shortly after my dad died, one of the older kids in my school came to my room one night with a TDK C90 cassette compilation tape, and he said, "Look, I'm really sorry about your dad, and I've done this for you." And he gave me this cassette with all these bands on going from this, and I listened to it on my little stereo every night, crying my eyes out a lot of the time. Anyway, many, many years later, due to the wonders of the internet, we got in touch with each other, and we've become friends all these years later. God, and we still share musical discoveries with each other. And he's far too modest, but I tell him, you saved my life. You didn't know what you were doing, but you saved my life. And he saved my life.
It's a simple act of human kindness, isn't it? It's being seen. Yeah, it's amazing.
An act of human kindness in the same way as people, if we fast forward many, many years, people sort of took me to meetings and said, look, this might be your tribe. They didn't say it like that. So he gave me this one tribe to belong to, and it got me through that. But then there was cigarettes, and then there was cigarettes and drugs, and then
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I know you know Chip, not a dissimilar story to Chip. I mean, it's just a perfect storm of trauma and abuse that almost is going to lead you to heroin, right?
It led me to whatever allowed me to not have to deal with it, and avoid it, and then in ever increasing potency, I suppose. It led me to I think if just smoking weed had stopped me feeling like that, I may well have stopped at weed. I don't know. Who knows? Because I certainly jiggled that chemical equation, with some fervour and enthusiasm, like a lot of us do early on. Well, if I try this with that and that with that, or less of that or more of that, I was always trying to do something, and whether that was with substances or how I looked or how I spoke, or I'm quite chameleon-like. If I spend a lot of time in Liverpool with my music, and within a few hours I'm like, "Hello there, mate." I kind of co-opt the Scouse accent, and I love to fit in whilst at the same time stand out, which is the dichotomy of kind of alcoholics and addicts sometimes. We love to arrive, right? But at the same time, we kind of like to hide. It's all part of this tapestry of the behaviours that we can have.
Yeah. Okay, so how did you end up being Oasis's drug dealer? How did that happen?
So I kind of got kicked out of school, I think would be. It wasn't a planned exit. Like, it was just, I kind of left one day and they didn't ask me to come back. I was still living in a small town in England. My mum, bless her, had remarried. I didn't get on with him. Unfortunately for me, he was the headmaster of a school, and they weren't really my favourite people, you know. He wasn't to know. And no one, of course, no one knew what had happened to me at school, because that's the kind of nature of that kind of abuse, is that you don't feel you can talk to people. So I'm just carrying this stuff. I literally ran away to London one day in 1986, and I remember standing on the corner of Shaftesbury Avenue and Frith Street, Soho. So I know there's a lot of American listeners here, but if you just imagine the seediest part of, if you imagine the seediest part of your town,
it really was, yeah.
Oh God, yeah. You met Times Square in the 80s. If you got people who've been in New York, or Skid Row in LA in the 80s, or whatever. I remember standing there thinking, this is bloody fantastic. I'll try not to swear. I think my language is probably a bit more Anglo-Saxon than that, but I just had this kind of like, this is incredible. There's something going on here that's not going on in this little small town that I've just come from, and what was going on was addiction and alcoholism and prostitution and criminality and all that kind of stuff, which just completely and utterly, I was high on it. I drank it up, and I thought, this is where I'm going to stay. But I didn't stay. I ended up moving to Los Angeles by accident. I mean, people will laugh at this. I got a job in a bar in a hotel in London. I wasn't even 18. I lied about my age. Now in England you can drink at 18. Mm-hmm. And after a month, the manager said, "Listen, we're going to have to let you go because we think you've drunk more than you've sold." There were already some flags. This is at 18. I had another 20 years to go. Right, this was at 18. So they gave me a month's salary in cash, and I walked out the hotel and I saw. This was 86, so Virgin Atlantic had just started flying, and they were doing one-way tickets, London to New York, £99. This was obviously way before 9/11, where an idiot like me could turn up at an airport with his one-way ticket, with no address to go to, no onwards destination, arrive in New York and blind drunk. I used to be the guy sat at the back of the aeroplane with the bottle of Chivas, carton of Marlboro Reds, Walkman on, just thinking this is going to be great. I genuinely had no idea what I was going to do when I got there. No idea. Didn't know anybody. I just thought it would arrive in New York. I'd take an internal flight to Boston.
You'd get there and it would just happen.
That's right. Yeah, totally. Then I'd take a flight to Boston, addresses that may or may not have been real, that someone had given me, that they were friends. So I go to Boston from Logan Airport into South Boston to this address. He's looking at the address. The cab driver goes, "Buddy, you sure you want to go there? It's not a very nice part of town." And I'm like, "Yeah, it'd be great." I'm like 18. I'm 18 years old. And he drops me at this address, and there are some people who basically take me in. They're like, "We don't know who you are or where you've come from, but we like your accent. Do you want to come in and do some coke?" So I was like, this is great. I love Boston. I love these people. Anyway, look, long story short, because I'm going to try to answer your question, I didn't stay in Boston because I figured it was too cold and I didn't have any money. And so if I was going to be free, broke and homeless, it'd probably be better to be in California because it would be warmer, which it was for a couple of years. And the thing I found most peculiar was that I couldn't drink legally.
Oh, because it was 21, yeah.
Because it was 21 and I was 18 and I'd been drinking solidly for a good 4 years by that point. So I couldn't go to like a bar and sit and drink. But you could buy drugs really easily at that time in Venice Beach, where I ended up living. It was quite a frightening place, but during the day it was nice. And anyone who's been to Venice Beach will remember the guy on the roller skates with the guitar. He would be skating around, and but at night time it was a whole different thing. There was that crack epidemic which had really taken a hold. There were people shooting each other, and I was just caught up in all that. Just that young English guy that I became friends with some of the local Crip gang because they didn't see me as like the enemy. I was this like crazy English guy that I was like their mascot.
The accent goes a long way in America.
A few times and put in jail for the weekend, and all the time it didn't occur to me once for a second that this had anything to do with alcohol and drugs.
Just thought you were unlucky.
I just thought I was like, I'm unlucky, in the wrong place at the wrong time. I got arrested in this car, which I knew was stolen, but I didn't really want to believe it was stolen because I had some piece of paper. It had Idaho plates on it. I bought it off this guy who, for like $50. It was a Chevy Monte Carlo. It was worth about $5,000. And I was driving around in it and I got stopped and there was like an ounce of pot under the seat and an open tin of beer in the front. And I just thought, I'm so unlucky. So not surprisingly, after a couple of years, I left America and I came back to London and the whole thing just carried on. But here in Britain, and I fell in with people that worked at the music festival scene in the UK, Glastonbury being the main one at that time. I kind of became the guy that would hang around backstage and the band would arrive, and if they needed something to kind of get them through the day, the weekend, the evening, I knew where they could get it, and so I'd go and get it. And this is the late 80s, early 90s. And all the while, blind drunk all the time, just because I hid in that music industry where, it was kind of the norm, really, or that's how I saw it. Or you could certainly go to a different show and hang out with a different band and go to a different party. And there's no one there in the door going, you haven't been to sleep for 3 days, Simon. Maybe you should go and go to bed. No one asks those kind of questions. And they still don't so much. Maybe things have changed a bit for the better. Anyway, to answer your question, I knew I'd get there in the end. One night, I'm in London. I have a phone call from this guy. He says he's got this band, they're the next big thing. And I'm like, mate, if I had £1 for every time I'd been promised the next big thing, I wouldn't have to sell drugs for a living. And he said, no, honestly, these guys are something else. They're playing this tiny club, 150 people in London, King's Cross. I went down there and that's who it was. And we hung out for a couple of years, really, I suppose, is what I'd say. You're a bit more direct than me, but I'd say we hung out for a couple of years. I witnessed this band that I don't listen to these days, but I was 25, 26. They went from playing to 150 people to 150,000 people in less than 2 years. It was incredible.
Wow.
From the Water Rats, this little club in King's Cross, to the Nebworth shows of 96. And it was exciting and it was thrilling and they were great. And and I don't regret any of that. But again, all the way through this, I was actually telling this story to someone the other day. So I came back from this tour and I literally collapsed. I was walking to the store by my house and I just collapsed. And this was, in the mid-90s where you could still kind of go and see your doctor and get an appointment in Britain rather than having to wait for 4 years to see a GP. And I kind of went to see my GP and I said, listen, there's something wrong with me. You need to help me. And he said, when was the last time you had something to eat? And I'm like, I don't know, last week. And he said, you need to go home and sleep and eat. And I just kind of laughed at him and thought, I've asked for your help and you're telling me to go home. That's not help. That's some sort of moral judgment. I couldn't believe it. Like, you're a doctor. I want tablets. I want drugs from you to make me better.
So how long were you because I was in London during that time. I mean, that whole Britpop thing, like Oasis were the biggest. I mean, I don't know how. Did they crack America? I feel like they did a bit, but not like.
No, they had a couple of fairly good goes at it. They did a tour with the Black Crowes, who certainly did crack America, and quite rightly so. They're a wonderful band. But I think there was a couple of occasions where Americans prefer British people to be polite, and if possible to be able to understand what they're saying. Liam Gallagher on sort of a bottle of Jack Daniels, and I don't know how much cocaine it is unintelligible. You can't understand a word he says. And I think there was a lot of that.
Mancunian accent.
A very thick Mancunian accent. And look, how many bands or actors from Britain rock up in America and think that they just because they're British, they're entitled to success. You have to work your ass off.
Yeah.
You have to really, really work if you want that success in America, you've got to be prepared to bust your ass for maybe years, And I don't think they were prepared to do that. It's, we could do a really obvious recovery adage there. If you want recovery, you've got to bust your ass, and get into it and make it the most important thing and grind it out. And even when there's, If there's no one there, then you go back there next. If you go to a meeting and it's not open, then you go to the next meeting, right? If you're Oasis and you go to a show and there's no one there, then you do another show. They didn't want to do that. So
because they were so big everywhere else, really.
They didn't need it.
Massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't really need to. Yeah,
they didn't need to. I think they were quite happy playing in front of 100,000 people in all over Europe and Asia and Australia, and so they didn't really make it. But then what's new? It's not an easy place to make it.
So there's bits in the book you were like on the tour bus and that kind of stuff. There's not I guess there's not an official role of drug dealer, but you sort of. Were you on the payroll? How did that work?
No, I wasn't on the payroll. So they released a film. There was a film released last year called Supersonic, which was about those first few years. And I watched it. I watched it, and I was like, you know what? It was fun. Some of that was fun. Some of that was a lot of fun. When you meet a band and the first time you travel with them, you're in a van. And there's like 10 of you, and that's the merch guy and the tech guy and the guitar, and you're all jammed in the back of a van, and within a really short space of time, the van just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you're on this like a house on wheels. That if you're into music the way I am and still am, and will always be, that's a lot of fun. And you're young as well. That's the other important thing. For an alcoholic addict, it's the perfect place to hide.
Yeah.
The perfect, because there'll always be someone that wants to stay up for another day. There'll always be someone that wants to find a bar that's open. And so that's where I hid until, I would say, the beginning of the end was 1996, where Oasis played these two legendary shows in Nebworth Park, which is a stately home just outside London. Led Zeppelin played there, and it was the fastest selling, biggest show of the time. I think at the time it broke all records. It was kind of like the Beatles at Shea Stadium or Elton John at Dodger Stadium back in. It was one of those events that apparently a quarter of the British population tried to get tickets.
Wow.
And I was deeply entrenched in heroin, alcohol addiction at that point. I was a real mess. And I went to the show. It was on my 27th birthday, August the 10th, 96. I scraped myself onto a guest list, and I got there, and I just couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with the amount of people. I couldn't deal with anything. I suppose would be fair, but the thing I really couldn't deal with was that I'd left my stash of heroin back in London. So I was faced with the sort of hypocrisy of a music industry that will applaud loudly if you're walking around with cocaine falling out your nose and go, hey, or if you're drinking a lot and go, hey. If you're heroin, there's no one doing that. Particularly if you're not making anyone any money. If you're making someone money, then it's kind of slightly different, right? But if you're a professional nobody like I was, then before Oasis played, and this might sound a little bit poetic, and it is with the benefit of hindsight, and I did write about it in my book, but addiction goes. As I was leaving this festival, this event, there were 250,000 people, and I left so early to go back to London to score some more heroin. Everyone else was kind of arriving. When I think about myself back then, and I was walking the opposite way to everybody else. Everyone else was going to something, and I was the other way. And the next 10 years were truly awful. Truly awful. Not just for me, because I eulogise for hours about how awful it was for me, but one of the things that I started to get an understanding of in sobriety and through doing some work on myself was how awful that was for everybody else that was around me. I have a distant relationship with my mum, but it wasn't until I became a parent that I had the slightest inkling of what it must have been like to be her, waiting for a phone call saying, he's wrapped his car around a tree, he's dead, I had no idea what that must have felt like. My daughter's 15 next year. But I remember the first time she had an accident when she was a baby. And, you know, your heart just kind of, oh, you know, this kind of fear grips you. And I remember thinking to myself,
there's no other fear like it, like being a parent.
No,
there's no other fear. It's a whole new level of fear.
Yeah, she pulled some boiling hot gravy all over herself when she was like a year old off the table. And there was ambulance and, you know, A&E and just that horror. And it was only then that I started to think, on some level, that's what people, the families of addicts, kind of live through. You know, that fear, that kind of put the people you love the most. As if it's your children that are alcoholics, or your mom or your dad, you know, whoever it is. Those people, you know, it was kind of noticed that stuff over the years. You know, that because whilst I was caught up in it, I was just so self-centered. It was all about me. You know, poor me. And have I told you what happened to me when I was a child? You know, you know that. So it just went on and on and on until, you know, and there was eight inpatient rehabs, 14 inpatient detoxes, countless trips to this part of the country or this part of the world to you know, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to go and dry out somewhere or get clean somewhere. 10 years of that.
I just want to put a spotlight on that, because I have several people going through this at the moment with several rehabs, and I was saying to them, like, I can't tell you what's going to be the thing, but I do know if you keep going, at some point they hear something, they see something happens, and that's the thing that makes them want to be clean and sober more than anything else. So you did all of these attempts. What was the thing, Simon?
The thing. See, I agree with what you're saying there, but I think that it was a kind of cumulative process.
And sometimes it's just accumulation of here I am again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just all of that, and then you're just so sick and tired of this merry-go-round. Yeah. Was it just that?
That as well. I recently filmed a show which is going to be on BBC Two in the new year. I'm not exactly called Reunion Hotel. The premise that they put two people together who haven't seen each other for a long time, who had a significant impact on each other, or one of them on the other. So I picked this guy that I hadn't seen for 20 years, who was a nurse at a detox that I frequented 10 times between 96 and 2006. He said, look, do you want to be on this show? It'd be great to see you. He said, why me? I said, because every time I rocked up at that place, you know, skin and bones, covered in abscesses, shaking like a leaf, full of self-loathing, you put your arms around me. He's a big Scottish guy. And he'd go, oh, man, it's good to see you. And he'd hug me. And you know what? It was kind of, no one said it was good to see me when I was like that, because it wasn't, you know? It's because of that. It was because people saying that to me and in meetings or wherever it was, all those things that you just spoke about, that the kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired, the beginning of having to sort of join some dots in this kind of what I thought was quite a complicated puzzle of addiction and alcoholism, which actually wasn't that complicated. Going to live in a country, and I'm extremely grateful for our National Health Service here in the UK. None of that cost me a penny. Not a penny. All paid for by the National Health Service. You know, I consider myself blessed.
Because you were unwell. You weren't a bad person. You were unwell because of the trauma, all of the stuff that you went through. You were unwell, and that's why you needed treatment.
But I didn't know I was unwell.
No.
I suppose those early episodes of treatment were, look, I've got a problem with this substance. It's really hard to, even with our own remorse of delusion, it's quite be looking at yourself in the mirror with a syringe full of heroin in your neck and go, oh yeah, this is how it was supposed to be. When you kind of get to that point, or you're waking up and fishing a cigarette butt out of a bottle of vodka to drink that wasn't what my careers officer at school, you know, said was, you know. So did I accept I was unwell? To answer your question about what happened and why, after all those attempts, the answer is I accepted that I was unwell and that I needed help, and perhaps more importantly, those two things, that I was deserving of that help and I was deserving of the rewards of that help should I avail myself fully to it. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm just trying to be clever. I deserve recovery. I deserve my sobriety. I deserve this life that since 2006, a day at a time, I have carved out for myself. I deserve the 15-year-old daughter that's never seen me drink, that I've never said to her, I'm going to do this and not show up because I'm drunk somewhere. To the best of my knowledge, promised her something that I couldn't deliver. And I don't mean that in any kind of fanciful, money. I've just been.
You show up.
I show up for her. Yeah. I'm worthy of that. And so maybe those episodes of treatment is the documentation of that journey from someone who didn't think that they were worthy of that for whatever reason, for the shame, for the guilt, for the way up me and why did I, and all that kind of stuff. And having to wade through that, with the help of a therapist, and I'm an active member of a 12-step fellowship, so that's dealt with a lot of that stuff, not all of it. I think when I talk about fellowships to the general public, I say, look, it's kind of like the Me Too movement in Hollywood. It's like a hashtag. I needed people to look me in the eye and go, yeah, me too. I did that. Well, that happened to me. Oh, right. Okay. So I'm not some sick monster then. It's like you as well. Wow. And I've had some Me Too moments from the last people in that room. I thought were going to sort of say me too as well when I say it. So to people who have, I guess I'm speaking to people listening to this. If you've tried and it hasn't kind of stuck, keep trying. When I was using, if I rang a dealer and they didn't answer the phone, I didn't go, oh, well, I won't use today then. I just rang another one and another one. If I was drinking and the bar, people say to me, is that a good pub? I'm like, it's open. It's a good pub. The only bad pub's a closed pub, right?
Tell me, like the role of music in your life, because you said, it saved your life and you've got tell me a bit about the Hightown Project.
I'm also a sober coach for musicians. So after my book was published, I think a lot of people, I say a lot, it wasn't like a bestseller. It did okay. There was the London Evening Standard said great things about it, as did Russell.
The Guardian.
Mr. Brand, and The Guardian. And Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page came to see the show. And
what, did Noel and Liam ever say anything?
Nah, no. But hey, who needs Noel and Liam when you got Jimmy Page? You know what I mean? So, and Pete Townsend said that I was cool and he thought I was quite smart and liked my scooter. So, I've had those two. I don't need the Gallaghers. Music, here's the joy of recovery for me. So I went to see my first show, my first band when I was 12. I bought my first record when I was 10. I was obsessed. Addiction robbed me of that. When I was drinking and using towards the last 10 years, music wasn't important to me. The only thing important to me was just not, was using and drinking. And when I came into recovery, I kind of walked that fairly well-trodden path. I went and worked in treatment services. That's where I first met Chip, and I did that for a number of years, and I learned some useful things, how to be a practitioner. But I got to the point where I thought, I spend far too long sat in front of a computer inputting information that I think is mainly useless, and not enough time and being with people and hanging out and just doing what that big Scottish guy did to me all those years ago and give me a hug and go, it's really great to see you, because the confines of treatment services won't let you do that. So after the book was published, a couple of people in the music industry, some of them read it to see if they were in it, most of them weren't, but a couple of people who managed some artists that I admired, still do greatly, got in contact and said, look, we're worried about so-and-so, and do you want to meet them? And maybe, you use the same thing as them in the same way. Maybe, so that's kind of what happened, how I ended up doing some of the work that I do now. And as a result of that, this one guy, and he's spoken about it publicly, so he doesn't mind me mentioning his name. And he's a cult artist here in England. It's a guy called Mick Head. He's from Liverpool, and he's in a band called Shack. And if you are a music fan and you like stuff that sounds like the Byrds and Love and all that kind of stuff with a Scouse accent, then go and listen to Shaq. They're incredible. Anyway, he was in a lot of trouble with alcohol. He'd used heroin and stopped with methadone, and then stopped the methadone, and then like a lot of people do, started drinking. And when I met him, he was drinking a litre of rum every day and 12 cans of special brew lager, which is like 9% alcohol. That's what on a daily basis, that's what he would drink. And we used to hang out, and he'd still be drinking, and we'd walk around Liverpool, and he'd go, "So Christmas, right? You're going to drink at Christmas?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm not drinking at Christmas." "What about when your mum dies?" "No, I won't drink." "What about when Liverpool win the league?" "They're never going to win the league." But this has all happened, by the way, subsequently to thankfully. Anyway, he didn't comprehend that anyone could just not drink. Like you just have a, what about when this happens? And he put all these kind of what abouts. And I'm like, "Look, Nick, I'm done. Don't drink. I just don't, I don't. Why not?" Which is a really good question to from here. I said, "Well, do you know why not? Because I don't want to." And I remember saying that to him and thinking, I don't want to. I'd never really pondered that. I know technically why I don't, because when I start, it's just, when I start, it's going to. So that's the technical reason. And I can eulogize about that forever and say, well, but it's not often that you stop to think and go, wow, that's great. How great's that? Not wanting to do it. Because I thought that this would be some weary sort of trudge through the rest of my life, white knuckling it, clinging onto a table, go, "Oh, I can't drink." I don't want to drink. I don't want to use. I have such a wonderful, simple life of just simple pleasures.
Yeah.
He's my songwriting hero, this guy, Mick. So he rang me up one day and said, "Look, I need your help. Can I come and stay?" So I invited him into my home, and my daughter was away for a couple of weeks. And we got the alcohol nurse to come and do his observations, and he detoxed at my house. And here's a moment that a life-changing moment for me. So he was halfway through, he was sober, and at the end of the first week, he said, "Look, I don't know if I can play sober. I've never done it. So I'll tell you what we'll do then, Mick. We'll arrange a little gig here in London, and you do it sober, and I'll be there. And I can tell you all day long till I'm blue in the face that you can do it, but you need to know. Because once you know, it's no longer a theory, it's a fact." That's kind of how I work with people. It's like, you and I can sit here and theorize about it, but someone really ultimately later has to have that lived experience for themselves, and then it's a fact. It's no longer my opinion; it's a fact.
Yeah.
Their fact, not my fact, not yours, theirs.
Yeah.
So he agreed to do this show, and that night, my daughter had come back to stay with me for a little while. She was 7 at the time, and she'd gone to bed, and she came into the front room like kids that age do with her teddy and went, "Daddy, I can't sleep." She just wanted to stay up with the grown-ups, right? She was like rubbing her eyes. And Mick grabbed my acoustic guitar, which was literally gathering dust in the corner of the room. I hadn't picked it up for years. And he blew the dust off it and said to Tabitha, "Go and sit on your daddy's knee." And he sat there and he played music he played a bunch of songs that probably most people on this podcast would never have heard of, but I know every word to all of them. So just think about your favourite artist, whoever that might be, if you're listening. Your favourite artist, right?
I'm going to just say, for me, that would be Robert Smith.
Okay, so Robert Smith, during the intro to Boys Don't Cry, in your front room.
I'd be in a puddle.
7 days sober, whilst you're sat there with your then 7-year-old child, just bouncing her on your knee, stroking her hair while she goes to sleep. And then at the end of it, he says, "It's about time you started playing this guitar again." And that was how Hightown Pirates became a thing. So he was sober. We called ourselves Hightown Pirates just because I don't know where it came. We were it's a suburb of Liverpool anyway.
Right.
Shortly after that, I was away working with another band they've also spoken about me, the Libertines and Pete Doherty, and they took me on tour with them. And I just kind of thought, do you know what? I want this. I think I can do this. I can be in a rock and roll band. Does it matter that I was 45 years old? Who cares? I don't care. I mean, I didn't get clean to be bored. It's like I'm going to do it. Everyone's going, "Mate, you're a middle-aged man. What's the matter with you?" It's like, no, but I'm not. I'm finally the person that I was supposed to be. I've got so much stuff to write about. I've got so much to say. I know at least 3 chords on this guitar. That's all you need, right? The Cure probably only had 3 chords in it. You know, it's like, let's keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
So I started writing at the end of the tour with the Libertines, and I wasn't playing. I was just kind of looking after Peter. He said to me, look, I'm doing this solo tour. Do you want to be the support act and play some songs and read some of your book out? And at the end of that tour, someone contacted me and said, look, I want you to make an album. I know why you're with Peter. I know what you've done. I've read your book. I know that you're trying to help people. I know that you haven't got any money. And I was like, yeah. And then they said, how much money do you need? And that's one of those things in recovery where it's like, is this going to be the old me or the new me that answers this question? It was the new me, and I said, I don't know, but I'll do some maths and I'll let you know. So I spoke to some friends of mine, musician friends of mine. I said, look, who wants to make an album? And we put this band together. We rehearsed for 5 days, brand new band, and then we went to this studio that Peter had sorted out for us on the banks of the River Thames near Henley-on-Thames. I mean, just beautiful English. And we made an album called Dry and High, which you can listen to at your leisure on Spotify. I won't get any money out. Well, you can contact me and buy a vinyl copy. All these people that I loved, I'd played in bands with them in the past. We invited my girlfriend, now my wife, she came, she brought my daughter. The dog was there, girlfriends were there, kids were there. They were all camped on the garden by this studio. And the guy, Barry Barlow, he was formerly the drummer in Jethro Tull back in the day when drummers earned enough money to buy massive houses at the side of the River Thames. When people paid for music, I've got to think about that, haven't I? I keep going on about it.
It's true. Yeah.
He came down sort of during the early evening one night and he said, you know, Simon, I've been here for 25 years. I've never seen anything like this. Like, you've got assembled all these people and the kids and the dog. He said, people are like, he said, what's that about? I said, you know what this is, Barry? I said, this is the sound of redemption. This is what this is. These are people that without recovery, none of this is happening. Yeah. You know, there's no bands because you know there's none of it. None of this is happening.
Yeah.
And he said, I've never felt something like this. We've had Amy Winehouse here in her dark days, and he listed off all these other bands of artists that he said I've seen the cars turning up at 3 a.m, and I know what they're doing. He said, but this is like, I said, yeah. He said, there's so much laughter and joy. I said, but yeah, you're after a middle-aged man to make a debut album. It's like ludicrous, but.
I want to leave it there because that is just beautiful. I have this vision in America and England of a festival called Soberfest, where it's an alcohol and drug-free music festival with sober artists. So, and it would be really eclectic because you could have like Duran Duran, John Taylor sober, Eminem. You could have the Hightown Pirates. You could, I mean, there's just so many. Florence and the Machine, she doesn't drink.
Yeah. We don't sing.
Oh, God. Because we know dancing and listening to music and having fun is so much better with alcohol and drugs. So I am in the process of manifesting that shall be at some. I've even got the venue. The venue for the America would be in Nashville. And then we could do it in England as well. And that's my vision.
You know where it would be? You know, be a really good place to start with that. I mean this seriously, is to contact Emily Evis at Glastonbury and say, look, why you have this festival with 250,000 people of it? You know, the vast majority of them are able to drink and take drugs, right? And whatever it is, they wouldn't admit to or drink and have a good time. But there's nowhere on your festival site, aside from a little rickety old tent. Why don't you have a field? Not a big one, just an area, a recovery field. And that's where you put your stage.
Yes.
Right?
If anyone listening to this can put me in contact with Emily Evis, please reach out. But I'm just going to like find her on Twitter or something. Brilliant. Soberfest within Glastonbury. I've never been to Glastonbury.
Just one field in that huge site where it's like no drugs, no alcohol. You know, presence of all the various people and help and support. And you know, and even if you need to just come there and come down and you know, who appears on that stage is in recovery. Chris Difford will do it. He does it all. He does all of them. That's the place to start.
where can people find you if they want to reach out and find your book and your music?
So if you want to say hi, if you just Google Hightown Pirates. So I have an Instagram called Hightown Pirates. I have a Twitter. It's actually currently called Wilderness Hill because that's the name of this new album I'm making.
Okay.
I'm making an album, but if you just put Simon Mason Hightown Pirates and you use any kind of social media, I'm currently on a 6-month sabbatical from Facebook. I'm so happy I haven't been on Facebook for months, but I suspect I'll creep back in the new year when I've got a new record to promote.
Yeah. When this gives you a link, you've got to put it.
Yeah, and this as well. Right. So Hightown Pirates, Simon Mason.
Brilliant.
And yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Simon. Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm so glad we got you on. I've always wanted to have a good chat with you. I did sincerely love the book. I read it in 5 days. It's a fantastic read. If you're going to read any drug memoir, read this one. It's really, really good. And Simon walks the walk as well as talking the talk. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon. And
thank you so much.
I'll see you at Soberfest at some point in the future.
Greetings of the season to you and your family. Have you got snow where you are?
Tons of it. Yeah, like 4 foot of it.
For me, because we haven't got any. Okay.
All right, thanks, Simon. Bye.